The Orion Arm had turned into a graveyard of burning stars and broken ships. Planet after planet fell to the endless push of the Vare Dominion. Their fleets were vast, built on centuries of conquest, and their discipline crushed every defense thrown against them. Colonies that had once been filled with trade and laughter were reduced to ash clouds drifting in space. Refugee ships fled wherever they could, carrying nothing but fear, stories of horror, and the hope that someone stronger might stop the advance. But no one had stepped forward yet. The surviving fleets of different species tried to regroup. The proud Ralvac, with their heavy cruisers, had lost half their strength in one battle. The Elvari, once masters of sleek energy weapons, now found their entire defense network shattered in weeks. Smaller species, who had only a few ships to begin with, were forced into exile, their homeworlds already claimed by the Dominion. The great council chamber on their shared capital world was filled with whispers, arguments, and the smell of fear. Every leader had seen the reports. The war was already lost. The only question was how many more lives would be fed into the fire before the end. Voices around the council chamber grew louder each day. Some urged surrender, to kneel before the Dominion and hope for mercy. Others demanded a final stand, to die with honor even if nothing was gained. The chamber's polished marble walls, once a place of debate and balance, now echoed only with hopelessness. For the first time in centuries, there was no faith in unity. Trust had broken. Allies looked at one another and saw weakness, failure, and betrayal. And yet one name kept coming up, always followed by a pause of silence: Earth. The humans had been quiet for decades. They had never joined the council officially, never fully shared their technologies, and never revealed the true size of their fleets. Many of the elder races dismissed them as young, loud, and undisciplined. To some, humanity was nothing more than a noisy species climbing too quickly through the stars. To others, they were dangerous, unpredictable, stubborn, unwilling to bend even when reason demanded it. But now, with the Dominion pressing its blade against the galaxy's throat, some wondered if those same human traits could be their salvation. Still, the silence from Earth was heavy. Messages were sent. Pleas were broadcast. None were answered. On the surface, it appeared that Earth had chosen to stay out of the war. The Council assumed that the humans, too far away from the main battlefronts, had decided the war was lost before it even reached them. After all, humanity was divided into many nations, many voices. How could such a species agree on sending help when the Council itself could not? It was easier to believe Earth was fractured, unwilling, or simply too weak. But far away from the Council's eyes, in deep chambers and hidden stations, Earth was moving. Human commanders met in silence, their discussions cut off from every foreign ear. In underground war rooms beneath Washington, Denver, and Lunar Command bunkers, military leaders spread out star maps across long tables. Holographic displays showed Dominion fleets and collapsing colonies. Every defeat, every retreat, every pattern of invasion was studied with sharp eyes. While the galaxy believed humanity had turned its back, Earth was writing a plan. The human fleet was not idle. For decades, while the Council bickered over laws and treaties, humans had built in secret. Entire shipyards existed beyond known trade routes, hidden in asteroid belts and at the edge of nebulae. These were not simple fleets like the Council's designed for defense or patrol. These were ships meant for war. Crews trained in silence, told never to reveal their orders. Scientists worked in secrecy, creating weapons that the Dominion had never encountered, weapons designed to shatter shields and pierce armor. It was a gamble, because if humanity failed, they too would be wiped out. But no one on Earth was preparing for failure. Captain Daniel Harris sat alone in his quarters aboard the battleship Aurora, one of the keystones of this secret force. His eyes scanned the incoming reports of destroyed colonies. The names of places he had never visited still weighed on him like stones. He knew that every fallen world meant more fear across the stars. And he also knew something the Council did not. The moment would come when humanity could no longer remain silent. He thought of the men and women under his command, their quiet readiness, their unspoken trust. The galaxy believed Earth was absent. But Harris and his kind had been preparing for this very moment all their lives. On the other side of the planet, in a fortified base buried under ice, Admiral Rachel Monroe reviewed the final stages of mobilization. Her fleet's engines were ready, their weapons primed, their crews sharpened by years of relentless drills. She listened to the Council's desperate broadcasts not with despair, but with cold focus. She knew what they did not. When Earth spoke, it would not be with pleas or excuses. It would be with thunder. And so, while the Council chamber drowned in fear and while worlds fell like dominoes under the Dominion's march, humanity's silence hid a different truth. It was not weakness, not distance, not indifference. It was patience. It was the careful drawing of a blade kept hidden until the perfect strike. The galaxy believed no one was coming. The Council thought they had been abandoned. But in the hidden heart of Earth's war rooms, the Supreme Fleet waited, ready to take the stage in a way no one could have imagined. Captain Daniel Harris leaned over the glowing table in the Aurora's command room, eyes fixed on the shifting holograms of Dominion fleets. The light reflected off the steel lines of his face, but his mind was far away, already calculating risks, movements, sacrifices. Across from him stood Admiral Rachel Monroe, her posture calm but unyielding. She handed him a sealed data drive, the kind reserved for the highest orders, and spoke in a quiet, steady tone. "It's time." The Aurora was no ordinary ship. It was one of many hidden titans forged in secret across deep space yards known only to Earthfleet. While the Council's fleets had relied on outdated doctrines, each of Earth's warships carried innovations designed for one purpose: to destroy. Their hulls were plated with experimental alloys that bent energy beams instead of absorbing them. Rail cannons, stretched the length of skyscrapers, were capable of firing slugs that moved so fast they ripped through space-time distortions. Plasma lances could melt enemy cruisers in seconds, and deep within their cores, engines designed with fusion lattices allowed speeds no other species had dreamed possible. Daniel remembered the day the first whispers of the Dominion's rise reached him years ago. Most species dismissed the danger, thinking it was far from their borders. But humanity, still young compared to the ancient powers, had never trusted silence. "Prepare for the storm before you hear the thunder," Monroe had told him back then. And so they had. The Aurora was not alone. Across the dark, hundreds of ships waited cloaked in nebulae, buried in asteroid fields, or orbiting nameless moons. The galaxy believed humanity was fractured, but here in the shadows stood proof of unity. At the secret Lagrange shipyard, crews worked tirelessly. Men and women in gray uniforms carried crates of munitions and plasma cells, their boots echoing against the metal floors. Massive hangar doors opened, revealing wave after wave of sleek corvettes and destroyers, their dark surfaces absorbing starlight like predators waiting in silence. Engineers joked in hushed tones, but the truth pressed heavy on them. They were preparing for a war humanity had never officially entered, a war they could not afford to lose. Rachel Monroe stepped onto a balcony overlooking one of the final departures. Her eyes lingered on a line of cadets boarding the cruiser Liberty's Flame. They looked too young, but each carried themselves with a fierce pride. She knew many would not return, yet none of them hesitated. The Dominion thought numbers made them invincible, but Monroe understood something they never could. Humans were not trained to fight for orders alone. They fought for each other, for survival, for the very idea of freedom. That kind of fire could not be measured in fleet size. Far from the shipyards, deep in an underground bunker on Earth, strategists mapped out the larger play. The Dominion had stretched itself thin, certain that no force could strike back hard enough to matter. Their arrogance had left blind spots, and those blind spots would become Earth Fleet's hunting grounds. Admiral Monroe's plan was not to meet the enemy head-on with brute force. It was to cut at their tendons, break their coordination, and drive fear into a war machine that had only ever known victory. In the quiet of his quarters, Daniel Harris replayed a recording from his sister on Earth. Her voice spoke of ordinary life, children running in fields, neighbors fixing harvest machines, people still believing the war would never reach their soil. That was why he would fight. The Dominion would never touch them, not if he had a say. He slipped the recording away and tightened the straps on his uniform. Orders had been given. The waiting was over. Signals flashed across encrypted channels, bouncing between hidden relays. Whole battle groups powered up their engines, cloaking fields shimmering off like a veil being lifted. Crews strapped into stations, weapons charged, reactors hummed with restrained fury. The Supreme Fleet was awakening, and though no alien eye had yet seen them, their movement was like the rumble before a storm breaks. In the silence of space, the Aurora drifted out of its concealment, followed by a dozen destroyers that fanned into formation. Far behind them, more ships aligned, their lights sparking one by one like stars being born. Harris stood on the bridge as the holographic view cleared. For a moment, he let himself feel the weight of it all. The trust of billions, the silence of Earth, and the desperate hope of a galaxy ready to collapse. Then he gave the only order that mattered. Signal the fleet, we move. The chamber of the Galactic Council was vast, its domed ceiling painted with ancient constellations, but on this night the beauty was wasted. Fear hung in the air like smoke. Delegates sat in tiered rows, their voices raised in panic, their arguments bouncing against polished stone walls that once carried songs of unity. Chancellor Vera of the Elvari stood tall, her silver robes flowing, her voice trembling as she cried for surrender. "Better chains than extinction," she declared, her hands raised toward the others. Across from her, General Kor of the Ralvax slammed his clawed fist onto the table, the sound cracking through the chamber. "Fight!" he roared, his tusks flashing. "Better death than slavery." The arguments spiraled, each species pulling in a different direction. Old grudges resurfaced, whispered suspicions poisoned the air. The proud Saren accused the Vera of cowardice. The Ralvax sneered at the fragile-bodied Elvari. The smaller races sat in silence, knowing their fleets had already been ground to dust, their only hope tied to the decisions made here. For the first time in generations, the Council was nothing more than a hall of frightened voices. The lights flickered once. A soundless pulse cut through the chamber, silencing every argument. The delegates turned toward the great hollow screen at the front, expecting yet another Dominion broadcast of victory. Instead, an unfamiliar seal glowed into existence, an emblem of a blue sphere surrounded by a halo of stars. For a moment, no one recognized it. Then whispers spread like wildfire. Earth. A hush fell. The humans had been absent from every council meeting for years, silent while worlds burned. Many believed they had retreated into isolation, too fractured and self-centered to care. And yet here, without warning, their voice returned. The screen shifted to reveal a figure standing tall in a dark uniform, the insignia of Earthfleet gleaming on his chest. His eyes were sharp, his jaw set. His voice, when it came, cut through the silence like a blade. "To the Council and all free peoples, hold fast. Reinforcements are inbound." Gasps rippled across the chamber. Delegates leaned forward, unsure if they had heard correctly. Reinforcements? From Earth? Some scoffed, muttering that it was a trick, a desperate attempt to win influence at the Council's last breath. Others sat frozen, their hearts daring to believe. Chancellor Vyra shook her head in disbelief. "Empty promises," she whispered, though her voice lacked its former strength. General Kor leaned forward, his massive frame trembling, not with anger, but with something unfamiliar, hope. "At last," he muttered, "they move." The human's message did not linger. It was short, precise, and final. No promises of glory, no speeches of unity, no demands for power. Just a command that carried weight like steel. Hold fast. Help was on the way. The screen flickered out, leaving only the emblem of Earth spinning slowly in the air. No one spoke for several breaths, the silence louder than the arguments had been. Then, one by one, delegates began to stir. Those who had argued for surrender now looked uneasy. Those who had called for a last stand straightened in their seats. For the first time in months, despair was cracked open by the smallest spark of belief. High above the chamber, in the observation galleries, refugees and junior staff whispered excitedly to each other. Children clutched their parents' arms, asking what it meant. The word spread faster than any official report. The humans were coming. Earth had answered. Beneath the marble floor of the chamber, hidden tunnels carried the whispers into the streets of the Council's capital. Citizens stopped in their tracks as the broadcast reached their hollow screens. Shopkeepers, soldiers, priests, and workers all turned their eyes to the sky, as though they might see the promised fleet already descending. For the first time in years, the Dominion's shadow seemed to falter, and far away, beyond the Council's knowledge, engines roared to life in the void. Hundreds of human ships shifted in formation, their commanders steady at their posts. The message had been sent not only to assure the Council, but to mark the moment for the fleet itself. The order was given. The storm was coming. The defenders of Myrath Prime clung to their failing ships, their battered cruisers barely holding formation as the Dominion armada closed in. Alarms screamed across every deck, and captains shouted desperate orders into failing comms. Just as the enemy prepared their final strike, the void above the planet shimmered. At first, the defenders thought it was another Dominion trick, some new weapon designed to mock their last resistance. But then the stars bent, light itself rippling like waves across a lake. One by one, shapes emerged from the distortion. Sleek, angular hulls cut through the fold like blades. Their surfaces glowed faintly with shield harmonics, and their engines burned brighter than suns. Dozens became hundreds, their formations perfect, their arrival silent but thunderous in meaning. Across their dark hulls gleamed an unfamiliar insignia, a blue sphere with a halo of stars, the mark of Earth. The lead vessel dwarfed the defenders' ships. Its vast frame blocked out the starlight, casting a long shadow across the battlefield. Its name glowed across the side in sharp white letters, Resolute. The comms crackled, carrying a voice so steady, so precise, it seemed to silence the chaos around it. This is Admiral Rachel Monroe of Earth's Supreme Fleet. We stand with you. The alien crews froze. Many had doubted the rumors, convinced Earth would never risk itself for them. Yet here they were, their ships gleaming with power unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Their hulls were forged from alloys that shimmered like liquid metal. Their weapons tracked the Dominion lines with calm precision, each barrel humming with deadly intent. On the bridge of a Ralvac cruiser, General Kor bared his fangs in awe. "By the stars," he whispered, his deep voice trembling, "they came." On a nearby Elvari frigate, Chancellor Vera clasped her trembling hands together, her silver eyes wet with sudden relief. For the first time in months, the defenders felt their spines straighten, their lungs fill with air that was not poisoned by despair. The Dominion, however, did not falter. Their commander laughed, his voice echoing across the comms. "So this is the mighty Earth fleet? Hiding in shadows until now, sending toys to die in real war?" He ordered his armada forward, confident in his numbers. Yet, even as their engines roared, the humans moved. The formation shifted with elegance, ships weaving into place like dancers in a deadly performance. Defensive screens snapped into alignment, overlapping layers of energy that glowed like shields forged by gods. Smaller corvettes raced ahead, their movements sharp and surgical, cutting across enemy lines before the battle even began. From the deck of the Aurora, Captain Daniel Harris stood at attention, his voice low as he gave the order. "Weapons free." The words rippled through the fleet like a fuse lit. Across the formation, barrels turned, rail cannons locked, plasma lances began to hum, and then the stars themselves erupted. Bolts of energy speared forward, tearing through Dominion shields as if they were paper. Rail slugs screamed through space, striking with such force that entire cruisers split in half. Plasma beams carved arcs of fire, leaving trails of molten debris drifting like shattered constellations. The defenders of Myrath Prime, still stunned, now found themselves fighting alongside gods of war. Every ship that had been moments from death now rallied. Alien captains shouted with new strength, their crews roaring as they formed up beside the humans. Where there had been only retreat, there was now defiance. Where there had been despair, there was fire. The Dominion's advance slowed for the first time in years, and as explosions lit the dark, Admiral Monroe's calm voice carried once more across every channel. "This is not your end. It is theirs." The Dominion surged forward with all the arrogance of conquerors who had never known defeat. Their war drums echoed in the form of engine signatures, a wall of metal and fire pushing against the defenders of Myrath Prime. Yet across the void, Earth's Supreme Fleet did not flinch. Their ships moved like one mind, each vessel slipping into position with precision that seemed almost unnatural. Where the Dominion saw chaos, the humans wove order. The first volley came not as a scattered exchange, but as a symphony of destruction. Rail cannons fired in sequence, their slugs moving so fast they tore streaks of light through the darkness. Entire Dominion cruisers exploded before they realized their shields had been pierced. Plasma lances ignited a moment later, burning lines through battleships, turning armor into rivers of molten fire. It was not a skirmish, it was execution. Alien defenders, battered and broken for months, suddenly found themselves in the wake of giants. A Ralvac frigate that had been seconds from collapse suddenly watched a human destroyer sweep in, its broadside cutting apart the Dominion ships that had surrounded it. An Elvari corvette limped behind Earthfleet's shields, its crew staring in disbelief as human point defense systems shredded incoming torpedoes with perfect accuracy. The humans fought not as if they were joining a battle, but as if they had always owned the field. Inside the Dominion flagship, confusion spread. Reports flooded in, shields shattered in a single strike, command ships crippled by weapons the Dominion had never studied. Their admiral barked orders, his voice growing sharper with every failed counter. They had counted on overwhelming numbers, but numbers meant little when Earthfleet turned every engagement into a slaughter. Captain Daniel Harris led his strike group like a scalpel, cutting into the Dominion formation with speed and precision. His orders were calm, his tone steady, but his crew could feel the edge of fire beneath his words. The Aurora's rail cannons tore through a battlecruiser twice its size, while its flanking destroyers finished off the escorts. Harris did not pause to celebrate. His eyes were already on the next target. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Rachel Monroe watched the enemy's advance stumble, their once perfect wall breaking apart. Her officers reported kill counts, shield levels, and enemy maneuvers, but her focus was always wider. Every move she made pulled the defenders back into the fight, giving them breathing space and purpose. "Stay with us," she ordered across open comms, her voice carried into alien ships. "Fight beside us." And they did. The shattered fleets of dozens of species formed up around the humans, their courage reignited by the thunder of Earth's guns. The battlefield itself became a canvas of fire and wreckage. Dominion ships spun out of control, colliding with one another as their formations collapsed. Burning debris rained into Myrath Prime's atmosphere, streaking the skies with trails of light like falling stars. The people on the surface, who had prepared for death, looked up in wonder at a sight none of them had expected. The Dominion retreating, pushed back by a force that had come from nowhere. But even as victory bloomed in the defenders' hearts, the humans pressed harder. They knew this was not yet the end. The Dominion had been wounded, but they were not broken. Admiral Monroe leaned forward in her chair, eyes narrowing on the massive flagship still looming behind the enemy lines. "We've cracked their shield," she muttered, her voice cold and sharp as a blade. "Now we break their spine." For the first time in living memory, the Dominion staggered. And for the first time in decades, the galaxy felt the taste of hope. Captain Daniel Harris felt the deck of the Aurora shudder as it cut through the debris field, the ship's engines screaming against the pull of wreckage and fire. Ahead loomed the Dominion's command carrier, a monstrous vessel bristling with turrets and layered-in armor thicker than a city wall. It was the heart of the enemy fleet, the brain that kept their war machine alive. Destroy it, and the Dominion's advance would crumble. Fail, and Earth's gamble would collapse before it had even begun. Strike Group Delta slid into formation behind him, destroyers and corvettes moving like hunting wolves through the chaos. Harris's voice carried across their channels, steady and sharp. "We cut the head off the beast. No hesitation." His crew answered with clipped affirmatives, their faces tight with focus. This was not just another battle. It was the knife's edge of history. The Aurora's rail cannons fired first, slamming into the carrier's shields and flaring them bright against the darkness. Enemy turrets swung to respond, filling the void with beams of searing light. Harris barked orders, and the Aurora rolled, its hull groaning as it dodged fire that could have split it in two. Smaller human ships darted forward, weaving patterns that tore holes in the carrier's defenses. Explosions blossomed across its flanks, but still the beast endured, its massive hull refusing to die. Then came the order no one had wanted to give. Boarding action. Dropships launched from the Aurora's belly, streaking through the firestorm as the Dominion tried to swat them from the void. Harris was aboard the first, armored in black plating, rifle in hand. Around him, Marines checked weapons with quiet determination. No one spoke of fear. The hatch opened, and the shriek of battle filled their ears as they cut through the carrier's hull. The corridors inside were choked with smoke and the stench of burning metal. Dominion soldiers poured in with snarling fury, their blades and rifles flashing in the gloom. The humans met them with a storm of fire. Harris moved like a man possessed, cutting through officer after officer, his every step dragging the boarding team closer to the reactor core. Sparks rained from the ceilings, alarms wailed, and the floor trembled with the impact of the larger battle outside. Every meter cost blood. Marines fell, their suits scorched and broken, but the survivors pressed forward. Harris fought at the front, his voice hoarse from shouting orders over the roar of weapons. Keep moving. Reactor room ahead. The Dominion's defenses thickened, officers throwing themselves into the path of the humans with desperate rage. But they could not halt them. At last, the team reached the core chamber. The reactor loomed like a sun trapped in a cage, its energy pulsing through thick conduits that powered the entire carrier. The Dominion commander stood waiting, armored and towering, a blade humming with energy in his clawed grip. His eyes burned with hatred. Harris raised his rifle, fired, and the duel began. The commander closed the distance in a blur, swinging his blade in arcs of light. Harris met him with sheer ferocity, parrying with his rifle's frame, striking back with desperate precision. Sparks and blood mixed in the choking air. Every strike rattled his bones, but he refused to yield. Around them, the Marines planted charges across the reactor, working against the clock as Dominion reinforcements hammered at the doors. With a final surge, Harris drove his rifle butt into the commander's throat, then fired point blank. The giant fell, his blade clattering across the deck. Harris stumbled, breath ragged, but did not pause. He slammed the final charge into place and shouted into his comm, "Detonation set! Pull back!" The team fought their way out, sprinting through collapsing corridors as the reactor began to scream with unstable energy. The last Marines leapt aboard the dropships as the walls tore apart behind them. From the safety of orbit, they watched as the carrier convulsed, light pouring from its wounds, and then exploded in a blinding cascade. The Dominion fleet reeled, their command shattered. Ships broke formation, captains screamed conflicting orders, and the once mighty armada faltered. Across the front, Earth fleet pressed the attack with renewed fury. The gamble had paid off. Humanity had not only survived the strike, they had ripped the heart from the Dominion's chest. And in that moment, the galaxy realized the humans had not come to stand in the shadows. They had come to lead. News of the Dominion's collapse at Myrath Prime spread like wildfire across the stars. Refugee ships carried the story faster than official channels, whispers racing through colonies, trade stations, and hidden outposts. At first, it was dismissed as rumor. How could the Dominion, undefeated for centuries, be thrown back in a single battle? But then the recordings arrived. Grainy, hollow footage of sleek human ships carving through the enemy like blades through paper, of the Resolute blotting out the stars, of Admiral Rachel Monroe's calm voice telling the galaxy to fight beside Earth. The whispers became belief, and belief became fire. On distant mining worlds, alien workers dropped their tools and wept, their children asking if the humans would come for them too. On frontier outposts long abandoned by the Council, captains raised their flags again, daring to declare resistance. Even in the halls of planets that had once mocked Earth as too young or too primitive, leaders stared at the proof that the humans had done what none of them could. Pride turned to shame, and shame gave way to awe. The Ralvak, who had once called humans reckless, now demanded to fight at their side. The Elvari, who believed logic was the highest weapon, admitted humanity's chaos had shattered the Dominion's order. Smaller races, those who had thought themselves forgotten, flocked to Earth's banner with gratitude. Old rivalries, the kind that had once divided the galaxy for centuries, began to crumble beneath a single truth. Survival was now bound to humanity's will. In the hidden bunkers of resistance cells, hollow screens replayed the explosion of the Dominion's command carrier. Fighters cheered, their spirits reignited. For them, the humans were not just allies. They were proof that the Dominion could bleed. Across space, long-dead languages found new words for the same idea: hope. Admiral Monroe felt the shift before the reports even arrived. On the bridge of the Resolute, she read the faces of alien captains appearing on her comm screen. Their voices no longer quivered with despair, but rang with determination. Some asked for orders, others pledged fleets. A few, proud and reluctant, offered their apologies. Monroe accepted none of their excuses, but she gave them all the same reply: then fight with us. Captain Daniel Harris, back aboard the Aurora, saw it in smaller ways. Alien crews saluted human officers without hesitation. Broken fleets aligned their formations to match Earth fleet's precision. Where once humans were dismissed as outsiders, now their commands carried weight across hundreds of channels. The galaxy, against its own nature, was awakening to something new: unity under fire. The Dominion, for all its might, had never faced such a thing. They had conquered divided systems, crushed isolated fleets, and ruled through fear of disunity. But now their enemies rallied, not in scattered desperation, but with a singular resolve. Earth had lit the spark, and every world was catching flame. In marketplaces, in academies, in military outposts, the same story was told again and again. The humans came. They came when no one else would. They came when all hope was gone. And because of that, entire civilizations that had been ready to kneel now rose to their feet. The galaxy had expected Earth to remain silent, too far and too fractured to matter. Instead, humanity had spoken with thunder, and their defiance was contagious. The Dominion's final stronghold loomed over a dying star, a fortress world ringed with fleets so vast they blotted out the heavens. For years, it had been the heart of their empire, a place where prisoners were broken, fleets were forged, and terror was carved into the galaxy's memory. But when the Allied Armada arrived, Earth's supreme fleet took the front line. Their engines flared brighter than the star they fought beside, and every alien captain knew the last battle had come. The Dominion poured everything into the defense. Waves of cruisers surged forward, their guns vomiting fire, their commanders desperate to prove that the Empire still stood. Yet humanity led the charge with relentless precision. The Resolute drove into the enemy's core formation like a spear, her rail cannons ripping apart dreadnoughts that had once been considered invincible. The Aurora and her strike group carved open supply ships, leaving the Dominion starving for fuel and munitions in the middle of their last stand. The Allies followed Earth's path. Ralvac warships charged with reckless abandon, their tusked commanders roaring in unison with human battle cries. Alvari frigates spread shields across Earth fleet's flanks, weaving logic and discipline into humanity's fury. Smaller races, once broken, now threw themselves into the fire with a strength born from hope. For every Allied vessel that fell, another surged forward to take its place. On the surface of the fortress world, firestorms consumed the horizon. Human marines and alien soldiers stormed bunkers side by side, their banners planted in the ruins of Dominion bastions. The defenders fought with savage desperation, but for every meter gained, humanity pushed them two back. The galaxy's most feared warriors found themselves hunted through their own corridors, their command structure collapsing under the weight of unity they had never imagined. In orbit, Admiral Rachel Monroe stood firm on the Resolute's bridge, her voice steady as she issued orders across 1,000 channels. Every word carried not just command, but conviction. She had promised the galaxy Earth would stand with them, and now she was delivering that promise in fire and steel. When the Dominion's flagship tried to break free, Monroe's guns turned it into a sunburst of molten wreckage. When the fortress shields finally failed, it was Monroe who gave the order to strike. The fall of the Dominion was not quiet. It was a storm of light, a roar of collapsing fleets, a silence after centuries of terror. And when at last the fortress cracked apart, its towers sinking into the stars' burning pull, the galaxy watched with breathless awe. The empire that had seemed eternal was gone. The council reconvened, but the chamber that had once been filled with fear was now filled with reverence. Leaders of broken races, scarred generals, and humbled chancellors turned their eyes to the humans. They no longer spoke of Earth as young or untested. They no longer doubted their strength. They saw saviors, leaders, warriors who had carried them out of the fire. In refugee camps, in marketplaces, in schools and homes, the same words spread across every tongue. Humanity came when no one else would. The galaxy would remember. And as the fleets scattered to rebuild, Earth's ships remained at the center. Not because they sought dominion, but because every world now looked to them for guidance. Humanity had taken the stage, not as outsiders, but as the new anchor of the stars. The Supreme Fleet had ended despair, and the galaxy would never again look at Earth as a distant, fractured world. It would see them for what they had become, guardians of hope and the fire that taught the stars to resist.